Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
This is Lora Cecere. Welcome to the program today, Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and it's designed for the supply chain leader that's on the go but wants to be in the know. It's an independent company. It's not one that I take money from vendors to be able to do paid research or have paid studies and white papers. Instead, I use the LinkedIn panel group that I have of 307,000 people, which I give great thanks for, to be able to do independent research, to look at how can we use new technologies, how can we test and learn, and how can we improve supply chain processes. It's my mission. Let's talk about inventory today. I was at a client site the other day and I was showing them the slide of how inventories in 2010 to 2018 are higher than they were pre-recession. And we had a long discussion about this. And, I remember the supply chain leader that looked over her glasses and said, "Why is this, Laura? Why have we spent 1.7% of revenue on technology and so much fun with the evolution of technology, and yet we've not improved inventory?" And I said, it's 5 reasons. And she said, let's talk about them. Well, the first reason was that supply chains became more global. We had more in-transit inventory. And we didn't really manage form and function of inventory. Now, form of inventory is what should be a raw material, what should be a finished good, what should be a semi-finished good. That's about conscious choice, right? And in the global supply chain, we need to decide where are we going to place inventory to minimize risk, maximize opportunity, and manage in-transit inventory. Unfortunately, what we've implemented are technologies to maximize the opportunity for safety stock. And we keep implementing the same types of technologies over and over again to minimize safety stock, whereas the most important opportunity for most companies lies in the management of form and function of inventory, and the important opportunity that's still out there is cycle stock. Cycle stock happens through the management of production scheduling to manage the long tail, to be able to group products together in production scheduling, and to be able to align schedule adherence with tactical supply chain planning. Now, I've watched in the last 2 decades as we've moved forward in the evolution of planning, more and more companies are very focused on tactical planning of how do they make a better forecast? How do they translate that forecast to S&OP? But they really have not connected distribution requirement planning, finite scheduling, and the implementation of transportation very well against the tactical plan, which gets us to the management of cycle stock and in-transit stock. When we're better at the connection of tactical planning to operational planning, we can do a better job of managing cycle stock. So let me give you an example. When I used to manage the ice cream factory at Dryers, we would have the rabbi come in on Sunday night and we would bless the plant and we would run the kosher products. And then we would run vanilla. And then we would run allergen products, and then we would basically start with the flavors, and then we would run the allergen products with nuts, and then wash out. That is a cycle. The production planning tools maximize the value of inventory, customer service, and in-stock positions through the management of cycles in manufacturing. To be able to maximize the value of cycle stock planning and finite scheduling, we've got to be disciplined to not break those schedules, to be able to work on clarity on planning, to be able to manage production scheduling, to manage the cycle stock. It's one of our greatest opportunities right now. When I go to a lot of companies, they've forgotten the basics of cycle stock management. And I actually went to one company where They had great improvement in forecasting. It was like 22% improvement. And yet they had not driven that improvement into inventory. And when I peeled back and examined the process, I found that they encouraged reactive behavior at the manufacturing site. So the manufacturing site that changed over the most frequently for customer service would actually be incented to have dinner with the chief operating officer because it was interpreted that they were more customer-centric. What the organization didn't realize is that we will never fill all orders. We will typically, in the best case, have a 99% fill rate. And getting to that fill rate takes a lot of work. But when we're reactive and when we change over those manufacturing schedules willy-nilly, we interrupt cycles and we cause high levels of cycle stock. So why do we have more inventory? We've become more global. We have more in-transit inventory on the water. And we've not done as good a job in the last decade with cycle stock, and it becomes more important as the long tail increases. But also, I think that most companies have invested in safety stock tools, and they've not managed forecast value add. And because they're not looking at how do they improve forecast value add, minimize error, and minimize bias, safety stock calculations increase because the higher the forecast error, the more inventory I need, and it's disproportionate, right? So most people that do simulation are shocked at what a 1% error increase can do to a safety stock level, but yet they're degrading the forecast often by 10 to 14%. So let's not focus just on safety stock. Let's focus on forecast error, and let's focus on the form and function of inventory. Let's try to get the forecast error as close to perfect as possible through lean processes and measure forecast value add. And not just stop on inventory management with a focus on safety stock, but to look at form and function of inventory. The form of inventory, of raw materials, semi-finished goods, finished goods, where should inventory be held in the global supply chain, function of inventory, safety stock, cycle stock, in-transit stock, seasonal stock, and make conscious choices about that. But probably the biggest issue is the management understanding of inventory. As we've become more financially driven and we're having a lot of CFOs do financial engineering of supply chains, sometimes they see that inventory is a big slop bucket that they can put their hand in and they can pull out the saving grace for the quarter. The more financial reengineering we do on inventory and the less we understand that inventory is the most important buffer for the supply chain, we've got to have that understanding, because when we do financial reengineering of the supply chain and we take inventory out willy-nilly without allowing it to be the natural buffer, we do great damage to the supply chain. Also, when we elongate payables and we don't manage the cash-to-cash cycles in a healthy way, we will drive up cost. So the understanding by the leadership team of inventory, the role of inventory in the supply chain, and the importance of inventory at form and function is not well understood with most companies that I go to work with. Likewise, there's tension between, is inventory a bad thing or a good thing? I would argue that inventory is the most important buffer, and making the right decisions on inventory is critical. But yet when I go to educational environments, people will ask me questions of, don't I want to get rid of inventory? Isn't inventory a bad thing? Isn't days of inventory a bad thing? No. It's the right inventory. It's about conscious choice. It's about alignment of inventory strategies with supply chain strategy. We can't just say inventory is a bad thing without really looking at the role of inventory for demand and supply error and being able to design buffers and align tactics to drive the best performance. So what are some tactics that we can use? Things like postponement of how do we delay final pack out? So Gillette uses the Walmart point of sale data. They take their razors and totes to a contract manufacturer, and when they see the point of sale data, they pack out based upon what the sales numbers are telling them about the number of packs per razors, or the color of the razors. If they try to put all of that product into finished goods, they will never get it right, and they'll end up repacking because they have obsolete inventory. That's postponement. Paint supply chains are designed for postponement. Color is put in at the last stage when the customer comes to the shelf. Postponement is a very valuable strategy. Likewise, platform rationalization is an important strategy. I remember when I had Dave Beaker speak at my conference, and he spoke about the maximization of value through simplification of formulas and having common formulas for products. At that time, Dave was the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Campbell's, and he worked with R&D to rationalize product portfolios to be able to look at how could materials be reused effectively. In that case, Campbell's had 33 different types of carrots in their soup. And he said, how many types of carrots do customers really care about? And it turned out there were 4 cuts that really made a difference. And he said, what if we simplified our formulas so that we only had 4 cuts of carrots, right? Tremendous value. And the broth bases, what if we simplify the formulas so that instead of every soup having this different broth, that we could have commonality of formulas? Because often new product launch is reinventing the platform with every evolution. Platform rationalization, postponement, pooling of inventory. Items with very high demand variability should be pooled and in a common location to be able to be pulled when they're needed versus pushing the inventory to the final point. So let's go back to the question that I was asked at a global supply chain leaders offsite. Why are inventory levels today across the supply chain, across all industries, higher than they were before the recession? I think it's because we've become more global. We have more in-transit inventory. But I also think it's because complexity has increased and we're not looking at form and function of inventory, maximizing cycle stock, designing the tactics to be able to manage complexity. And I think it comes down to leadership understanding of the role of inventory as a buffer and the need for consistent strategy. So when we look at the evolution of analytics for the autonomous supply chain and the role of inventory as we get to outside-in processes, it will become more and more important for teams to be very schooled on the role of inventory as a buffer. A buffer allows us to absorb demand and supply volatility in effective ways. Demand volatility is increased, and in fact, often companies have elongated the tail, increased complexity so that demand error is 10 to 15% higher than it was a decade ago. Supply volatility is increased. So buffer strategies are very, very important, and it comes down to managing form and function of inventory through design and network design tools and sales and operations planning, as we look at demand shaping, product rollouts, and in operational strategies as we look at distribution requirements planning, transportation processes and policies, supplier processes and policies. But it comes down to conscious choice. It comes down to managing inventory, form and function together, and aligning the organization to embrace inventory strategies. This is Lora Cecere. Until next time.